The Falcons trading for Brandon Aiyuk? No, let's be serious. But we could be seriously looking at trading for a superstar pass rusher in the future.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who are helping you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a lifetime, formerly at foulfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me on a daily basis that makes this illustrious podcast your first listen, your first watch each and every day. We call you the everydayers out there. Raise your hand if you're an everydayer. And if you're not raising your hand, all you got to do, guys, is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we're going to talk about why it's important that guys like Arnold Ebiketie and Matthew Bergeron step up this season. But let's start with the buzz of the week, which is San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk is requesting a trade after not being able to work out a long-term deal. And San Francisco's already kind of poured cold water on the idea that they're going to trade him. They basically have a 2-year window to win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy on a cheap contract, and trading their probably fifth best player probably doesn't make a ton of sense. But, you know, I saw people speculating, especially Falcon fans speculating about the possibility of an Aiyuk trade on Twitter the other day. I just figured most of those people were bored at work and just wanted to talk about something on the timeline that really has nothing to do with the Falcons, but trying to make it have something to do with the Falcons. Now, we know if the Falcons were serious about trying to upgrade that X wide receiver position, they would have just drafted Rome Odunze in the draft rather than Michael Penix. But, you know, they're not going to now go and be like, yeah, let's give up, you know, future draft picks, give up $80 million in guaranteed money to sign Aiyuk to a long-term deal on a contract that's averaging over $30 million a year or whatever. You know, they're going to be rocking with Darnell Mooney at that X wide receiver position. Now, if you're sitting here wondering, you know, is Darnell Mooney the answer at the X wide receiver position? Well, guess what? Welcome to Locked On Falcons. We've been wondering that same question for the last 4 months. But the Falcons have $26 million guaranteed to Darnell Mooney over the next 2 years. He's not going anywhere with that type of contract. The real concern at the wide receiver position is potentially next offseason, not looking to upgrade Darnell Mooney's spot at the X spot. It's going to be upgrading the slot receiver spot, right? Mooney, Drake London, locked in on the outside spots for the next 2 years. But is Rondale Moore and Ray McCloud locked in that slot role, right? That's the Cooper Kupp role. And as we've mentioned a number of times when talking about, you know, the Sean McVay offense that we expect new Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson to try to run a variation of here in Atlanta, that the slot receiver, Cooper Kupp, the Z wide receivers, Robert Woods and now Puka Nacua, are the breadwinners in that offense, as opposed to the Kyle Shanahan version of that offense, where the X wide receiver, Brandon Aiyuk, Julio Jones, Arthur Smith, his version of that Shanahan offense running it in Tennessee had A.J. Brown and that X wide receiver. That's the guy that the offense runs through, but that's not the case in the quote unquote Zach Robinson or Sean McVay offense. And, you know, I don't expect the Falcons to feature their slot receiver in Rondale Moore, Ray McCloud in the same ways that the Rams featured Cooper Kupp over the last 7 years. Instead, I kind of think a lot of the Kupp duties will fall on Kyle Pitts, especially when it comes to what Kupp does as a blocker in the run game. And so we'll see how that plays out. I did a breakdown today for the Locked On Falcons Insiders, detailing some of my thoughts on what Zach Robinson's offense could look like, looking at a game from last year against the Arizona Cardinals that the Rams played, and looking at some plays that I think you could see the Falcons featuring regularly under Zach Robinson. And we'll talk more about sort of Kyle Pitts and the various players' roles in the offense. But if you don't want to wait, you know, a couple of days, couple of weeks till we get through all of that, you can learn right now, especially if you're a visual learner and you like to have the accompanying film to sort of give you that visual stimulus rather than just hearing it in your earballs on this audio version of the podcast. That's where becoming a Locked On Falcons Insider can help you. All you got to do is hit the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It is a 14-day free trial, so you can check that video out right now for free, and then in 2 weeks, you can pay $4.99 a month thereafter. That's $1.25 a week. You know, with inflation going on, what else is as cheap as $1.20? Is that a can of corn? You know, is that like $3 now? I have no idea at this point in time. But you know, some of you guys that are tuning in for the first time are like, "Is this guy this arrogant on every show?" And I'm like, "No, that's not me. I'm so humble, guys. I'm your very humble host, but I'm not this arrogant on the show." But one of the things that I tend to, you know, when I veer away from humility on this podcast, it's being ahead of the curve, right? And oftentimes on this podcast, we're talking about things that are weeks, months ahead of everybody else. You know, it's one of the reasons why people refer to me as a prophet. You know, that's divine intervention, all that sort of stuff. But you know, while everybody else is sitting here talking about the Brandon Aiyuk trade, I'd rather talk about another potential future trade that may be on the horizon, and that is the plausible Micah Parsons trade. And you're sitting here going, plausible? Is that possible that the Falcons could trade for Micah Parsons? We'll see, right? Again, it's not going to happen anytime soon, right? The Cowboys have 3 guys that they got to pay: Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, right? Are they going to be able to pay all 3? A lot of people are skeptical that they're going to get all 3 of those deals done in the next calendar year. We really haven't seen any team successfully, you know, pay $30 million to more than 2 players in today's modern NFL, and that's probably what the asking price of all 3 of those. Well, Dak's going to probably get closer to $60 million, but Micah and CD are probably going to be north of $30 million. And right now, because Dak and CeeDee Lamb are entering contract years, they're the priorities, and those are deals that the Cowboys kind of need to get done in the next 6 months, and they don't seem to. We'll see. Again, that's why we say it's plausible. Again, we'll have to see how it all plays out. But that could definitely lead Micah Parsons out in the cold if they do wind up paying both of those guys. And it will be the best time for the Cowboys to potentially move Micah Parsons via trade before he goes into his contract year in 2025 to move him next spring. So that is a possibility. We know Raheem Morris comes from LA, where, you know, a certain general manager, former Falcons front office person by the name of Les Snead, you know, is all about, you know, as they say, as the kids say, F them picks, right? And probably the asking price for Micah Parsons starts, again, whether it ends there, but it starts probably with 2 1s and a 2 to try to at least get the Cowboys to actually pick up the phone when you call them about that trade, potentially next February, next March, or whatever. And, you know, the key to me being a prophet here on this podcast is all you got to do is just throw enough stuff at the wall and see what sticks, right? And so I can sit here and say, you know, if we get to March and there is, you know, Micah Parsons trade rumors and the Falcons are reportedly interested, I'll be like, you know, back in July, we were talking about this on Locked On Falcons, while the rest of y'all were talking about Brandon Aiyuk. We were talking about Micah Parsons. So we were like 8 months ahead of the rest of the world or whatever. And it doesn't come to fruition. You just like, well, I never said that the Falcons were actually going to trade for Micah Parsons. I just said it's more plausible than a Brandon Aiyuk trade. That's all I said, right? You know, you can't hold that against me. That's the key, guys. You just throw stuff at a wall, and whatever sticks, you claim it, and whatever doesn't, you just like, I've never seen that before. Who threw this? Who threw this at the wall? I don't know what that is, but that's you know, we need the Falcons to get that alpha pass rusher, and certainly Micah Parsons theoretically could you know, fulfill that role. But maybe we don't need that alpha pass rusher because potentially Arnold Ebiketie is poised to step up and make a big leap, and we'll talk about that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Passion, drive, patience. It is the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more, including seatbelt covers, which I just recently got delivered from eBay Motors. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. I don't have to worry about getting my money back because my seatbelt colors did fit my ride every time. And with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Now, in the NFL, you want to hire quality professionals that are going to help your team win. And the same is true for your small business. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is going to have the tools to help you find the right professionals to help your team win faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just any old job board. They're going to help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but just might be open for that perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So we have discussed throughout the summer a bunch of potential breakout candidates, and Arnold Ebiketie, the Falcons' third-year pass rusher, is absolutely one of those potential breakout candidates. And the Falcons are, especially on the defensive side of the ball, making big bets on players like him, as well as several other young players that they've drafted over the last 4 years to make some of these big jumps to really solidify that defense. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast over the last several weeks and months, arguably years, I tend to be a little bit more skeptical than your average Falcon fan when it comes to whether or not those guys are going to make that big leap, especially when it comes to the defense. My expectations going into the season is that we're going to see a below average Falcons defense this year. That's not good enough to sort of ride to the postseason. But, speaking of getting to the postseason, the All-Star break is over. And, now you're probably wondering what your favorite Major League Baseball team needs to do to get to the postseason. That and other big stories are covered every single day on Locked On Sports Today, is streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels. That part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, if the Falcons are going to make the postseason, it's going to be driven by their offense, is basically what I'm telling you. And we'll see if the defense can be better than I think, but I think it's going to depend heavily on players like Arnold Ebiketie, Troy Anderson, and several others, especially those that wind up winning starting jobs in the secondary at corner and safety. I think they're going to be huge factors in determining if that defense outperforms my expectations, right? If those guys make bigger jumps than I'm expecting, I think this defense can certainly outperform my expectations. Now, I personally look at Arnold Ebiketie. I think he's a 6 to 8 sack guy. And, I think that's a good spot to be for him at this point in time. But I know there's a lot of other people that are a lot more excited about his potential to be more than that this upcoming season. And a lot of that seems to be stemmed from how productive he was on a limited snap count last year. If you look at the 175 pass rush snaps that Arnold Ebiketie had last year, he was able to produce 6 sacks and 28 pressures. If you assume that he's just going to get the same snap workload that Bud Dupree had last year, which was 433 pass rush snaps, that's about 2.5 times as many. So if you extrapolate AK's production in 2023, multiply it by 2.5, that's basically 15 sacks and 69 pressures. Nice. And we've talked before about how, if based off of that pressure rate, you're probably more likely to get a lower sack conversion rate. So it probably won't be 15 sacks, but still 10.5 sacks, 10 sacks seems to be realistic based off of that pressure rate and a normal sack conversion rate. And so that's a good number. Double-digit sacks, nearly 70 pressures, right? But to me, the flaw in that sort of thinking is I think a lot of that is based off of box score scouting and not really watching the film and watching how Arnold Ebiketie won last year to get that production, right? That I talked about this back in June when I went back and rewatched every one of his sacks and hits last year, all 16 of them. I only thought one of them came as a result of Arnold Ebiketie beating an offensive tackle with a pass rush move, right? And that was Saints backup offensive tackle Landon Young. That most of the other production was schemed off of stunts and effort sacks and cleanup sacks, cleanup plays that other guys were creating or whatnot. And so to me, a lot of that production was more a byproduct of Ryan Nielsen than anything specific to Arnold Ebiketie's game. And that doesn't make me super optimistic that we're going to see him make this sort of big jump that I think a lot of people are expecting him to make. And so again, 6 to 8 sacks, 30, 40 pressures, that's a solid year for Arnold Ebiketie, but that's not too dissimilar to what Bud Dupree gave us last year with 6.5 sacks and I think 38 pressures last year. And so right now, I think Arnold Ebiketie, when you look at sort of the hierarchy of your 4-man pass rush, right now is probably a 4th guy in your rotation, maybe has the potential to be a 3rd guy. And how I would explain that hierarchy is your number 1 is your alpha, your Batman, so to speak, right? That's going to be the guy that offenses are game planning against. They're going to chip, they're going to double him, right? That's typically going to be a guy that's top 5, top 10 at his respective position. Then you have your Robin, right? That's the beta or whatever. And that's usually the guy that's going to take advantage of all the one-on-ones that the alpha is going to allow him to have, right? While the offense is focused on, stopping Myles Garrett or stopping Max Crosby, then the guy on the opposite side of the field is eaten, right? And then you have your 3rd guy, and typically, right, there are exceptions. We'll talk about a couple of them, where the 3rd guy, because usually your top 2 pass rushers are edge rushers. Your 3rd guy is usually that quality interior guy, right? That's kind of what David Onyemata has been for a large chunk of his career in New Orleans. That's what I think Grady Jarrett is at this point in his career. Now, in the past, Grady Jarrett was more that Robin, in my humble opinion. And so, we have that guy. And then the 4th guy is kind of the guy that tends to be a little bit more hot and cold, may get production because he's feasting off what the other 3 guys are doing, and may win, on occasion, but isn't the guy that you're reliably expecting to win, down in and down out like some of the top 3 guys are. And, just examples of that sort of hierarchy when you map it onto other pass rushers, you go back to the Saxonville days, that 2017 Jaguars D-line with Calais Campbell, Yannick Ngakoue, Malik Jackson, and Dante Fowler. Campbell, to me, was the Batman. Ngakoue was the Robin. Jackson was the 3rd guy, and Fowler was that 4th guy. You go to the 2021 Rams that Raheem Morris coached that won the Super Bowl. Aaron Donald was obviously the alpha, the Batman. Von Miller, for the first time in his career, usually is an alpha or Batman, but on that team, he was the Robin, right? Leonard Floyd was the 3rd guy, and Greg Gaines was that sort of 4th guy, right? And this year for AK is about how high he can climb up that hierarchy. Can he go from a 4 to a 3? Can he go from a 4 to a 2? Right? Now, can he go from a 4 to a 1 to a Batman? Is that possible? Sure. I guess it's in the, in the infinite number of realities that exist. I don't think it's realistic to expect that. Again, that would to me be historic improvement that we just really have not really seen other players do in the past. Maybe you can stretch if you consider Hassan Reddick to be an alpha, which I don't typically do. I tend to think of Hassan Reddick as more of a very good Robin, but he would probably be the best example of a guy that went from sort of an also ran to a potential alpha, if you consider him that, just because he kind of moved positions and all that stuff. But outside of that, I can't really think of a guy that would go to make the jump that we're talking about, Arnold Ebiketie potentially making to go to be a Batman. So I think, to me, it's more plausible, it's more realistic, even if I'm a little bit more skeptical of him making this leap, for him to be more of that Robin, that number 2 guy, that beta, whatever you want to call it, right? That still would be a big jump for him, but just wouldn't be sort of this sort of historic, unprecedented jump, right? And going back to my, evaluation of Arnold Ebiketie when we drafted him back in 2022, my eye-level comparison, to me, the player that I thought he was most likely to become in the NFL was Harold Landry. And Landry, to me, is a 3rd or 4th guy in Tennessee, despite, racking up double-digit sacks in 23 and 2021. I think he tends to pad his numbers with a lot of cleanup plays. I really think Jeffrey Simmons is the Batman and Danico Autry is the Robin in that, Tennessee Titans pass rush. To me, watching the film, and again, I wasn't studying, Titans film every single week, but to me, watching the film that I saw, Arden Key to me was more effective, more reliable of a pass rusher than Harold Landry was last year. And so I tend to consider Arden Key to be the 3rd guy and Landry to be more the 4th guy. But again, I think that's what we're kind of looking for from this Falcons pass rush. The Titans are kind of a pretty solid template for what we're hoping this Falcons 4-man pass rush can be this year, right? You have 2 sort of interior guys in Simmons and Autry here in Atlanta, Jarrett and Onyemata sort of driving the bus, right? Again, I don't know if Grady Jarrett or David Onyemata is capable of being the sort of Batman that Jeffrey Simmons is at this point in their careers, but that's kind of what we're hoping, something close to that. Maybe 2 Robins equal a Batman. Maybe that's what we're shooting for. And then your edge guys, Arnold Ebiketie and whoever out the other guys, presumably Lorenzo Carter, but maybe Braylon Trice is in the mix, maybe somebody else is in the mix, sort of are in there, sort of getting their production as well, even if they aren't necessarily the alpha and the beta atop the hierarchy. And so with Tennessee, you had 4 guys with 40 plus pressures. All those guys combined for I think 33.5 sacks last year. And Tennessee wound up finishing in the middle of the pack in terms of sack production last year. They were tied for 16th last year. So exactly in the middle of the pack. And that would be a great season for the Falcons pass rush this year. To me, given my expectations, I kind of think they're going to be a bottom 5 team in terms of sack production this year. That's my expectations. But if they can finish, with 45-ish sacks in the middle of the pack, that's, way overachieving what my expectations for this pass rush is going to be. So that to me is why I say the Titans are kind of the template for what we're looking for. So if Arnold Ebiketie is just Harold Landry, that's fine, especially if, Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata are on par with Jeffrey Simmons and Danico Andre. And so I think a lot of this defensive success hinges on him, Arnold Ebiketie, that is, and the rest of this pass rush, stepping up and making the plays, because we know that under Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake that we're going to play a lot more zone coverage than we did under Ryan Nielsen last year, right? Where Ryan Nielsen was able to dial up, simulated pressures and whatnot, playing a lot of man coverage on the back end and bringing extra pressure. We won't see probably as much. We'll see simulated pressures from Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake, but, it won't be as much man coverage. And as I stated many times, and as many as if you're going to, play zone, you need to get reliable pressure with 4. Otherwise, offense is going to carve you up. And I don't think people should underestimate the potential uptick in the caliber of quarterback that the Falcons are facing this year. I know we got a lot of talk about, hey, the Falcons have a weak schedule, but Tim Boyle and Josh Dobbs aren't walking through that door, right? And, you got to deal with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. And again, you may not think Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith and Derek Carr are high-end quarterbacks in this league, but if you give them, 3-4 seconds to throw the football, they have no problem finding the high caliber playmakers that they have on the back end. And we've seen Chris Olave and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith and Digba do some things to some defensive players, especially if you have some of the question marks the Falcons have in the secondary. So again, this pass rush to me holds the key to this defense making a big step up this year and outperforming my expectations. It's the key to winning your games. What's the key to winning your games? Outscoring your opponent, right? And so if the defense isn't carrying, their water, then you're going to need the offense to sort of step up. And again, that's why I think the success this year hinges more on the offense than the defense. But when it comes to the offense, everybody's expecting a lot. Everybody's excited about the Falcons' skill players. And I'm like, yeah, they're great, but this ain't the first time the Falcons have had, high-level skill players on offense, right? Their Achilles heel when they had those high-level skill players in previous years, was that they tended to get their butts kicked in the trenches. And so that brings us to the last player I want to talk about in terms of his ability to step up is Matthew Bergeron, and he's going to be a big part of this team's ability to not get their butts kicked in the trenches. We'll talk about that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is often the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives as you scroll through social media like Instagram. You feel like all these other people have their lives together, but they probably don't in reality. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so that you can start living your best life. Therapy has taught me positive coping skills like you can only control what you can control, which I use each and every Sunday whenever I'm watching the Atlanta Falcons. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, why not give BetterHelp a try? It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists at any time if you feel the need to for no additional charge, something that you won't have for traditional offline therapy. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/lockedon, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So we're hoping that Zach Robinson's going to do wonders for the big three, right? Referring to Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. And that's going to spearhead a very productive offense that I'm hoping will be top 15 unit, possibly better than that, right? We haven't had an offense on that caliber since 2018. And so, I don't think that's going to be entirely because the Falcons' skill positions are so great, right? They alone aren't going to be the catalyst to such an illustrious finish as a top 10, top 15 sort of unit. It's going to depend heavily on the guys up front doing their job as well, right? And especially when you look at the early season matchups against teams like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Kansas City, those teams aren't worried about our skill guys, not because, they can shut those guys down, but because the strength of those defenses lie on who they have up front. And they're just going to basically say, we're going to kick your butts up front and try to stop us. And, the Falcons' ability to win those games early in the season is going to be dependent on their ability to neutralize that strength. And that depends on the offensive line doing its job. And, we talked about Jeffrey Simmons earlier. He dominated that week 8 matchup last year against the Tennessee Titans. He basically made 5 game-changing plays practically single-handedly in the first half of that game, and talking a ton of trash during that game. He was basically, they punked the Falcons. He single-handedly punked the Falcons. And who was often on the receiving end of that punking? It was Matthew Bergeron. And basically what I'm sitting here saying with Matthew Bergeron is that can't happen anymore. And I've been listening and seeing for 6 months people praising Matthew Bergeron and the type of season he had as a rookie. And, call me a hater, as so many do. I don't get why there's been such frequent praise, right? He was fine as a rookie, right? Especially when you compare him to the last time we had a rookie starting at left guard. But as we talked about at the end of that 2021 season, that guy was historically bad. Like literally the bar couldn't be set any lower than what that guy did. And I know Jalen Mayfield's out there being like, man, why am I still catching strays on this illustrious podcast? And I'm just like, I got to do what I got to do. But, some of Bergeron's struggles, I think, were acceptable given that he was making the transition from left tackle to left guard, especially the issues in pass protection. Again, I think the technical differences of playing tackle versus guard, led to some of those struggles. But to me, the run blocking struggles, to me, were not because of a position switch. That position switch, I'm sorry. That's what disappointed me the most about his rookie season, because that was, to me, what the strength of his game was at Syracuse, was run blocking. And he struggled in that arena because, to me at least, and maybe some others will disagree with this, but like to me, a reach block is a reach block. Doesn't matter whether you're lined up at tackle, guard, on the right side or the left side. You should be able to make a reach block if you have the athleticism to do it, right? And to me, he wasn't making those reach blocks in the outside zone scheme, and that was a big reason why the run game was not effective. The left side of the Falcons offensive line, Jake Matthews and Matthew Bergeron, did not, bring their A games last year in that arena, and that needs to change this year, right? And I don't say all this to write off Matthew Bergeron as a bust or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch, right? I need to see him in week 1 against Cam Hayward. I need to see him against Jalen Carter not get pushed around and not have Jarvis on the postcast, second guessing the Bijan pick, as Jarvis will do if Jalen Carter goes off in that game. I need to see him not get punked by Chris Jones in that week 3 game. And that's just 3 games. You got Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Derek Brown, Christian Wilkins, and so many other quality tackles on the schedule this year. And so we need to not be having the conversation in 6 months. Is Matthew Bergeron good? Like, I don't want to have that conversation 6 months from now, right? Now, I'm not expecting him to shut down all those guys, but, when basically half your schedule is against Premier D tackles, I need a lot of those games, not all of them, but a lot of those games, those Premier D tackles to be relatively quiet. And that's not only important for the present for this team's success, given so much hype about the Falcons having a top 5 offensive line. And I'm just like, I would love to see that, guys, because I haven't seen that unit, at least in the last calendar year, right? And it's also important for the future, right, with this offensive line, right? We talk about the future of the pass rush with AK, right? If he can be a Robin and Grady Jarrett can be the 3rd or 4th guy instead of having to be, 2 Robins or whatever. And then in the future, when you're talking about the development of guys like Zach Harrison and Ruka Roro and Brandon Dolis and Braylon Trice, et cetera, right? Those guys can be 3rd or 4th guys in your hierarchy, right? If you got the Robin checkbox checked, right? And then all you got to do is go out there and get an alpha. And then, so it happens to be a guy that plays in Arlington, Texas, that, might be the answer to that solution. But, we'll talk about that in the future. But, when it comes to the offensive line in the future, not only, or in the present, you need your offensive line, the interior offensive line, to shore up in pass protection, because Kirk Cousins being a pocket quarterback, that interior pressure is going to be a challenge. But in the future, you're also going to need that interior offensive line to step up, because Michael Penix is also a pocket quarterback and, really struggled with interior pressure this past year at Washington. And, not only are we already talking about, that future with Michael Penix 3 or so years down the road, whenever that is, you're talking about potentially replacing 2 offensive tackles, right, before Penix hits the field. We're also talking about potentially what happens at center, right? Drew Dalman's in there in contract year. Is he going to be back? Is he going to be part of that offensive line? But if we're sitting here being like, I don't know if Matthew Bergeron's the answer at left guard, like now we have potentially up to 4 positions on the offensive line that we need to replace over the next, 3 years? Like, that's a daunting task. That's going to throw a big wrench into this positive upward trajectory trajectory that the Falcons are allegedly on, right? That if we have to revamp the offense on just like we did this with the previous quarterback and all the great skill position players, where we had to rework the offensive line for the better part of 2018 through 2021, right? And then we seem to get it. Okay, we got to kind of go in 2022, and then it's like, are we going to continue on that trajectory, or are we going to revert back to the old days when again we're getting our butts constantly kicked in the trenches? So this is part of the sense of urgency that you've heard me express on this podcast for the last 6 months, right? There's been a lot of talk in that period of time. Hey, this 7-win team is going places. And it's like, yeah, they got all the potential in the world, but it's time for that potential to start paying off. And that's true for Arnold Ebiketie, Matthew Bergeron, and so many of these other young players on this team, right? And I'm not sitting here bashing these guys to say, oh, they're bad or they suck or anything. I'm just sitting here saying, I need to see it before I believe it, before if I have to be the last guy on the Matthew Bergeron and Arnold Ebiketie bandwagons, then so be it. I'll be the last guy, but then I'll be like, you know what? I told you guys in the past, like, when we talked about the evaluations back after we drafted them, I had the vision. It just took a while for them. It took me a little bit while to circle back to it. So again, you throw stuff at the wall and you take it, you take advantage of what sticks. So that's the secret to my success. But, the secret to your success is to continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. And if you want to do so, make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. For your second lesson, check out Locked On Sports Today. And of course, if you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider and get that inside scoop, get some film to look at this Falcons offense and what we may see under Zach Robinson, by all means, become a Locked On Falcons insider by hitting that link in the description below. 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month thereafter. Guys, appreciate it. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every